Labour MP and chair of the Vote Leave Watch campaign, Chuka Umunna. Also here, UKIP's Patrick O'Flynn and Stephen Gethins from the Scottish National Party. Gina Miller, you've won them, these people, the rights to vote. What do you want them to do now?
Do their job. Debate in Parliament about the best course to take as we leave the EU.
But they're talking about this being very quick and simple. Is that what you meant? A quick and simple vote? Just get on with it.
That's not up to me. I'm not the politician. My question was a legitimate one to the courts about where powers begin and end. Where do the government's powers begin and end? And if the courts didn't think it was a valid question, and if it was a simple question to answer, we wouldn't have gone all the way to the Supreme Court. There were obviously things that needed to debate. That's why it wasn't unanimous. It was 8-3 win. But now it is a win, which means that Parliament, the MPs, have to now debate how we leave.
Kwasi Kwarteng, why did you call this outrageous and offensive, arrogant, when this began?
I did say that. I thought that, and forgive me if I'm being cynical, but I thought the reason why the court case was brought was simply one in order to frustrate the process, and many people feel that. I know Gina.
Do you think you were wrong about that?
Well, the process has been seen. We've seen through it. We've come to the end. And the judges have made their decision, and I respect their decision. But
do you respect Gina Miller's motivations?
I can't say what her motivations were. It seemed at the time, and I looked at some of the remarks that she made. Obviously, I've met her subsequently and know she's very charming and well-intentioned. But at the time, it seemed like sour grapes from people who were very upset that they'd lost the referendum and wanted to frustrate the result at any cost.
Was it sour grapes?
Absolutely not. I'm not sure how I can, on my own, have stopped the whole direction of Brexit. My question was a much more fundamental one. It was one about the foundations of our constitution. It obviously had ramifications for Brexit, and because it's this fundamental question about where the Prime Minister's powers begins and ends.
Chuka Umunna, as an MP, you think Brexit's bad for Britain, don't you?
I didn't support it. I voted to remain, but I accept the result. But look,
you still think it's a bad idea, don't you?
It should not have been necessary for Gina to bring this case. There was a certain hypocrisy in those who argued for us to leave the European Union. They did so on the basis that Parliament, the voice of the people through Parliament, should be sovereign. And then the Prime Minister coming along like some pseudo-dictator, saying that only she should have a say on the way that we leave the European Union. I accept there's a mandate for the government to take us out of the European Union, but I'm absolutely clear I'm not going to just sit by while they do so in a way that is going to trash the livelihoods of middle and lower income people in my constituency, and to do so in a way which disregards many of the promises that were made. For example, a lot of people now who voted leave, who are watching this programme, expect £350 million per week extra to go to the NHS. We have a right through Parliament to hold them to account for those promises that were made and ensure that the way in which we leave the European Union is in the British national interest and the interest of families in my constituency and every other.
You and I were in the Parliament before the last election and also before the referendum, and there was a vote in Parliament. You remember. You probably took part in it too. We had a vote to hold a referendum. It was very clear. Nobody said at the time that there was any way in which Parliament would reverse that result. I mean,
I'm not arguing.
It would make a total mockery of it.
I'm not talking about reversing. I'm not talking about reversing the result. What I'm talking about is Parliament actually getting a say on the way in which we leave the European Union, which is going to have a fundamental impact on our public services.
The Prime Minister of being a dictator.
That was the word. That was like a saying that she can just take us out of the European Union on royal prerogative. And all that Gina's court case was seeking to do was to give you, me, every other member of Parliament on behalf of the people.
How are you going to do this? How are you going to do this? Because you can't put £350 million a week into an amendment, because that's a money bill. You can't amend Article 50. So how are you going to do all of this?
Well, this is the big question, because we don't actually know what scope there is going to be in the bill, which we've been told is going to be published on Thursday, for us to make amendments. And don't forget as well, Christian, it's not just the Article 50 bill, it's the Great Repeal Bill as well. There's a whole raft of legislation. I mean, this is a huge
Let me bring in Stephen Gethin, because you also think Brexit is a terrible idea, but unlike
course I
Chuka
do,
Umunna,
yeah.
who's going to vote it through with Article 50 ultimately, you're not.
Yeah, but today was about, and actually, one thing I'll say, and I'm glad Gina's here, we owe a debt of gratitude.
We do.
Democracy doesn't begin and end in the Palace of Westminster, and politicians in London need to start figuring this out. This is an enormous job, and therefore, scrutinising it, the impact it will have on universities, on our health service, on EU nationals who have made this country their home and should be able to remain, on our health, on a whole range of areas, is immense. And that's why you have a parliament to scrutinise it.
But
and
you are going to thwart the will of the people,
Hold
aren't
on,
you?
and I have no idea why the UK government didn't want to put it under scrutiny. If they had the courage of their convictions and they were confident in what they're doing, they wouldn't have had a problem with this.
Patrick O'Flynn,
Yes.
is this what the Brexit Secretary meant by thwarting the will of the people?
Well, look, I find the views of all four other contributors somewhat deficient. Gina, I think, is what a demographer might call a representative from a very small section of Britain, which is very high.
48%.
No.
Which section of society
Excuse me,
then?
can I just finish? Yeah, very high-earning London households used to getting their own way, I would sum it up as. Kwasi, his government messed up. It was David Cameron's seat of his pants stuff. He said, listen, the referendum advisory and Article 50 not triggered as David Cameron promised straight away, which would have avoided all this. Stephen, Scotland voted to handle these issues as a United Kingdom and should accept the result. And if I can just finish. Chuka, you're so opaque. I know what your mate Paul Farrelly, who represents Newcastle under Lyme next door to Stoke-on-Trent, thinks. He's going to try and block Brexit. Your formulation of no blank cheques, you know, a lot of people think this guy is sitting on the fence. Now, I'm going to be knocking on doors in Stoke-on-Trent on Thursday. What should I tell a voter who says, I can't tell if that Chuka Umunna wants to leave or to stay in the EU?
I can answer the question directly.
Yeah.
I've said I accepted the terms under which the referendum was the rules, and therefore I find it very hard to set my face against triggering Article 50 for that reason. Right. But that does not mean, and that's the process of triggering Article 50 for views, this 2-year negotiation process, that is very different from the content of the deal, and that's where the blank cheque is concerned. Because surely, let me ask Patrick, are you saying that UKIP wants to give the Prime Minister a blank cheque to do whatever she wants on the deal? Are you seriously saying that?
I'm saying that you are obviously one of the 95% of Labour MPs who campaigned against leaving the EU.
Yeah, but what do you think they should do is to stay in? Should they just vote it through to give Theresa May the power to
Parliament
negotiate?
effectively handed the decision to the British people
exactly
and
what
calling for parliamentary sovereignty only against the views of the people after having turned a blind eye to selling it out to Brussels for 40 years.
Hold on. Let me bring in Stephen Gethens.
You conducted, and I actually think Patrick here is stating why UKIP have never even saved a parliamentary deposit in Scotland. You're understating why we campaigned on it. You've campaigned on a blank piece of paper. You didn't give us any details about what you planned. That blank piece of paper was an act of gross irresponsibility. We're having to fill in the blanks and to touch up the mess that you made along with your colleagues in the Tory party.
We had an exhaustive referendum campaign.
It wasn't clear.
We had an exhaustive referendum campaign. Every conceivable issue was raised.
Well, we were
and
promised
the British
immigration
people,
powers.
maybe not Scotland alone, but Scotland have voted to take these decisions as part of a United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom voted to leave the
Patrick,
European Union.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Why are we revisiting all of this anyway?
Because they are.
We have to move on.
We do, yes.
No.
Just
Just
let her make the point.
Yeah.
You need to move on.
Yes.
There wasn't any legal certainty about how Article 50 needed to be triggered. There wasn't. That's why I went to the courts. It's now been decided. You need to go ahead and have that debate
I
in
give
Parliament.
you credit, as I said, that the government
No, you don't
was
give me credit,
sloppy.
actually, because you put me in a box and you don't know who I am. So how dare you presume you know who I am, that I'm a London elite
Look, there are
who lives
certain
in
facts of all of us that get written, and your London Remain household. A lot of the country think London high-income households used to getting their own way. Well, out in the country, there are many households that have hardly got their own way in anything.
You know nothing about me, so don't make this personal.
I agree with Gina on this.
Don't make it personal. Talk about my case, not about me.
I agree.
I was just saying you represent a certain strand
No, I
of
don't
opinion.
actually represent anyone other than myself. I represent
If
myself.
you look at my constituency,
Yes.
80% Remain.
Yes.
The idea that somehow everyone's having a ball and it's wonderful and there's a bunch of rich people living in £1 million houses is simply not the case. I tell you, 40% of children growing up in my constituency democracy are living in absolute poverty. So
Yes.
don't go around making these sweeping generalisations.
Let's get to the
Remain.
debate that Gina Miller has forced,
Yes.
which is the kind of Brexit and the kind of Article 50 negotiation we are going to have. Kwasi Kwarteng, why do you want this to be a quick rubber stamp? Why shouldn't MPs get to decide on Theresa May's 12-point plan?
This is a complete fantasy. We are about to engage, once Article 50 is triggered, on a very complicated set of negotiations with 27 other member states of the EU. Nobody has any idea, nobody around this table, nobody in the country has any idea how those negotiations
But if a majority of MPs think leaving the single market is crazy, why should you get a rubber stamp?
That you can have an amendment that will bind the government's negotiating position for 2 years, regardless of what the other people are saying, is insane. There's no way you can do that.
Stephen Gethens, is there any way you can force the government to come back to Parliament?
Well, do you know something that strikes me is we offered a compromise around this. Before Christmas time, we offered a compromise. The UK government aren't willing to meet us halfway. Now, we will be using everything at our disposal. We'll be putting down amendments. The Scottish Government will be doing what we can do. Now, this should be part about having a sensible debate. This is an enormous issue. It has effect on quality of life. Chuka was quite right. He was talking about the poverty that exists in his constituency. Poverty that could be made worse if you don't get this right in terms of jobs and the economy. This is why we have a parliament. And again, coming back to Gina, that parliaments and democracies rely on citizens being engaged. They don't just rely on the MPs going away. And that's what we've seen in this. And actually, we should all be ashamed of the fact that it's taken a private citizen to bring this back and to underscore democracy.
Chuka, let me ask you, Nicola Sturgeon said, regardless of the ruling in the Supreme Court, there is a moral obligation to give Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland a say in this negotiation. Is she right in that?
Well, I think this is a UK-wide decision, and there are certain processes. The Council of Ministers across the UK from the different devolved administrations where they should be consulted. But this was a UK decision.
So no? Is that what you're saying?
Personally, one of the reasons I campaigned so strongly to remain is because I hate the politics of division, this idea of setting different groups against each other. And my fear with Nicola Sturgeon's approach is that in the end, her principal interest is dividing our country and splitting off Scotland. That's my view, and I don't agree with it.
Do you know something? In Scotland, we voted 2-1 to remain, and we were promised during the independence referendum.
It was
2-1. It was 2-1 to remain. Okay. And if we go back to your argument from earlier on as well, you were talking about the independence referendum. We were promised the only way that you can remain part of the European Union is by remaining part of the United Kingdom. Then we were promised during the EU referendum campaign by Michael Gove that, well, you could get some powers over immigration. That's been refused. Then we were told that we'd be a partnership of equals and we could have an equal say in partnership with the United Kingdom. That's been refused. All these solemn pledges that have been refused time after time. Now, the Scottish Government has a responsibility to defend jobs, the economy and the interests of people in Scotland, the same way with the Welsh Government and the Northern Irish Government. Now, we've put forward this compromise. We're trying to reach a halfway. This was a pretty big deal for the Scottish Government to do, even trying to put to one side the independence referendum, and that was turned down. And I'm not sure what kind of message that's sending out, but it's not a good one about a partnership.
Aren't you helping the cause of Scottish independence by not giving them a say?
Well, I think the UK decision was made as the United Kingdom. I think Chuka made a very good point about that. I think the vote in Scotland, and I see SNP MPs all the time, was slightly closer than you put out. It's 60-40. And it's very striking. And it's very striking that every single one of the SNP MPs, 56, speak for Remain. But 40% of the actual entire population of Scotland voted for Brexit. And that's a very interesting democratic deficit that you have to square.
All of our constituencies voted Remain. You talk about representing your constituents, OK? My constituents voted overwhelmingly to remain part because their jobs at University of St Andrews, jobs are really tied up in the European Union.
Iron discipline on one side of the question. Well, no, we all know that Scotland was quite split on this issue. I mean, even you have to accept that. And I think that's an interesting debate. And I think if they want to go down the path of independence, that's up to them. But be careful what you wish for.
I'm going to give Gina Miller the last word. I mean, you've unleashed this debate. It's already begun. What do you think?
Well, I thought it was a very interesting point. You were talking about listening to the 40% in Scotland as well as the 60%. Right. What about listening to the 48% in the UK, the 52%? Because actually, if anyone tries to bring up a sensible debate about Brexit and our way forward, they're shot down in flames. And I've experienced that for 7 months from all walks and all media. So I think we have to have fairness as we go forward. It has to be a sensible debate, and that's what I'm asking you all to do.
Are you giving
That's
up
why I
now?
spend my money.
Are you out of this now, or are you going to keep
I'm
fighting?
not a politician. I'm going to go back to my day job.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.